Good to see you in a new video on Betrayal Wife Tales. Today I'm going to tell you an interesting story of our subscriber.
It's funny how life can crumble, not in a single instant, but slowly, like a car wreck unfolding in front of you, one you can't avoid no matter how hard you hit the brakes. That's exactly how my life felt the moment I found out my wife was cheating on me. My name is David, and until a few months ago, I was married to my everything, Jessica. We had been together for 12 years, married for 8. We met back in college, a classic story of two young people falling fast and deep. It felt like fate, though I never bought into that idea before her. I used to be the guy who rolled his eyes at the concept of destiny or the one. All that seemed like it belonged in cheesy romance novels or Hollywood scripts. But Jessica changed that. She had a way of making me believe in things I never thought possible. She was this bright, vibrant force, full of laughter, warmth, and ambition. Her smile, man, it could light up a whole room and make the world feel like it was going to be all right. And for a long time, it really was. Our life together seemed like something out of a dream. We bought a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, got a dog, a scruffy little terrier named Max, and spent long weekends talking about our future. Kids were definitely part of the plan, or so I thought. I had a solid job as a software engineer, and Jessica worked as a high-powered marketing executive. We were that couple. The ones everyone saw at parties and said, "Man, they've got it all." Friends would constantly comment on how perfect we were for each other, how lucky we were. It felt like nothing could break us. But life has a funny way of pulling the rug out from under you, doesn't it? You think you're untouchable, like you're in some protective bubble? Then out of nowhere, reality comes crashing down like a storm you didn't see on the radar. It started with tiny cracks, the kind of things you hear about but never think will happen to you. Looking back, I should have seen the writing on the wall. Jessica started working late more often. At first, I didn't give it much thought. Her firm had just landed a huge account, and she was always the type to throw herself into her work. She'd come home late, tired but still smiling, and we'd settle on the couch to watch whatever show we were hooked on at the time. I trusted her. Completely. Maybe too much. Then about 8 months ago, things began to shift. They say your gut knows before your mind does, and I can tell you that's true. I felt it, this gnawing sense that something was off. Jessica was glued to her phone more than usual, but it wasn't the casual scrolling kind. It was something more intense, like she was waiting for someone to text back. At first, I tried to dismiss it. I didn't want to be that jealous, paranoid husband, the kind who imagines things that aren't there. But the unease was growing, whispering in the back of my mind, telling me I wasn't imagining it. Our conversations were different too, surface level, the kind of chit-chat you'd have with a stranger rather than your partner. The laughter we once shared, it was becoming scarce, hollow, like the echoes of something that used to be real. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to ask her. I had to know if I was losing my mind or if there was something more sinister at play. I still remember that evening like it was yesterday because I'd spent the entire day at work running through what I was going to say in my head, rehearsing it, trying to find the right words that wouldn't make me seem paranoid. When I walked through the door, Jessica was sitting on the couch, her phone in hand, barely noticing me. The sight of it made my stomach churn. I sat down next to her, trying to act casual, but my heart was racing like I'd just run a marathon. "Jess," I said, trying to sound calm, though my voice wavered a little. "You've been working a lot lately. Is everything okay? You've been a bit distant?" She didn't look up from her phone. "Just work stress," she muttered, her eyes still glued to the screen. "It's nothing." But it didn't feel like nothing. The way she said it, so dismissive, felt like a door slammed in my face. I wanted to press, to dig deeper, but something stopped me. I didn't want to come across as insecure or worse, like I didn't trust her. So I swallowed my doubts and let it go. For now. Weeks went by, and the cracks in our relationship only deepened. Jessica, who had once been a homebody, suddenly turned into a social butterfly. She started going out with her colleagues more and more, claiming she needed to unwind after long, stressful days. Normally, Jessica wasn't much for the nightlife. She'd usually prefer a quiet evening at home, but now it seemed like every other night she had some after-work event or happy hour to attend. She'd come home late, sometimes with a faint scent of alcohol on her breath, and other times I could smell a different perfume, a floral scent that definitely wasn't hers. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being irrational, paranoid even. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. One Friday night, she mentioned yet another work event. I offered to drive her, hoping that maybe being part of her world that evening would ease the growing distance between us. But she dismissed the idea almost instantly, with a tone that made me feel like I was more of a nuisance than a partner. "It's just for employees, David," she said, her voice laced with impatience. "You'd be bored." I watched her as she got ready, slipping into a dress I hadn't seen in months. She looked breathtaking, no doubt about it, but there was a coldness in her eyes that cut through me. It was like she was there physically, but her mind, her heart, was somewhere else. She left the house around 8 p.m., leaving me alone in the living room with the TV on. But my attention was far from the screen. I tried to distract myself, flipping through channels, staring at my phone, even considering calling up a few friends to see if anyone wanted to grab a beer. But I couldn't focus. My thoughts kept spiraling back to Jessica. My mind raced with 1,000 different scenarios, each one worse than the last. Was she really just with her co-workers? Or was there someone else? Someone who had already taken my place in her heart? I shook off the thoughts, feeling a lump of dread forming in my stomach. It was close to midnight when I heard her pull into the driveway. Jessica walked in with an energy that didn't quite match someone who was supposed to be drained from work. Her smile was too bright, her laugh too easy. And there was something else, a smudge of lipstick out of place and her hair messier than when she had left. The small, nagging voice in my head grew louder. "How was it?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. But I couldn't mask the tension in my voice. "Fun," she said, flashing that same smile that didn't reach her eyes. She didn't linger long. She disappeared into the bathroom almost immediately. I sat there on the couch, staring at the closed door, my heart pounding. Something was definitely off, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. I wasn't ready to confront the possibility that my worst fears might be true. Hours passed before I could bring myself to move. Jessica had fallen asleep in the bedroom, her phone resting on the nightstand, charging. The thought of snooping, something I never imagined I would do, crossed my mind. She had always been open with her phone, never hiding her passcode, and up until that moment, I had never once felt the need to invade her privacy. But that night was different. That night, I had to know. With my hands trembling, I picked up her phone and opened it. I scrolled through her messages, hoping, praying that I wouldn't find anything. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I was imagining things. But as I scrolled through her texts, my heart sank. There, nestled among the usual work-related messages, was a long thread with a guy named Mark. Hundreds of messages. At first, they seemed innocent. Banter, jokes, things colleagues might say to each other. But the further I scrolled, the darker it got. The messages became flirtatious, then explicit. There were graphic details, things I couldn't unread, and the pictures. My breath caught in my throat. Selfies, intimate photos, moments they had shared that should have been ours alone. I sat there, my world crumbling around me, unable to move. It was as if everything I knew, everything I believed in, had been ripped away in an instant. My mind raced. The woman I had trusted with my heart, my life, had betrayed me. She had lied. And for how long? I couldn't fathom it. The next morning, I confronted her. I could hardly look at her without feeling a surge of rage and heartbreak. When I showed her the messages, she didn't deny it. She couldn't. The evidence was undeniable. Jessica broke down in tears, pleading with me, saying it had been a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that she still loved me. But her words felt like daggers, hollow and empty. The damage had been done. The trust we had built over years was gone, shattered like a vase knocked off a shelf in slow motion, crashing into a million pieces. I wanted to scream, to break something, to release all the anger, betrayal, and grief that was coursing through me. But instead, I just sat there, number. The weight of it all was too much. I couldn't cry, couldn't shout. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air but never able to breathe. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of everything, but nothing added up. I went over every detail of our relationship, every sign I might have missed. Had this been my fault? Could I have done something differently? I replayed conversations, gestures, looks, but no matter how much I searched for answers, one truth remained. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger who had lied to me, betrayed me. And no matter what I did, there was no going back to the life we once had. We're not together anymore. After everything came crashing down, I packed my bags, walked out of the door, and left the life Jessica and I had spent years building together. Leaving wasn't easy. Every inch of that house held memories, some filled with joy and others stained by the weight of what I'd uncovered. But staying? Staying would have broken me even more. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Not after knowing what she had done. It's been about 6 months since I left, and the pieces of my life still feel scattered. Some days are bearable, good even. I've thrown myself into work, into anything that keeps me moving forward. Other days, though, are harder. The weight of everything presses down like a lead blanket I can't shake off. I've started therapy, trying to sort through the mess of emotions, anger, grief, confusion. Mostly, I'm trying to figure out how to heal, how to keep going after a betrayal that cut so deep. Trust, though. That's the hardest part. It feels like a scar I'll carry for the rest of my life. It doesn't matter how much time passes. The pain is always there in the background, a constant reminder of what was lost, what was shattered. Trust isn't something I can just rebuild. Not easily. Not after what happened. I've questioned everything since then. Every relationship, every interaction. I can't help it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to let my guard down again. Jessica still texts me sometimes. Her messages are filled with apologies, regrets, saying she wishes we could just go back to how things were, but we can't. That life is gone. It's buried under the weight of lies and the affair she tried to hide from me. And honestly, I wouldn't want to go back. Not to that version of us, not after knowing what I know now. It's like trying to rebuild a house on a foundation that's crumbled. It doesn't work. I don't have everything figured out yet. There's still a lot of uncertainty about where I'm headed, who I'm going to be after all of this. I'm still sifting through the wreckage of what used to be my life, trying to piece together a future from the fragments that remain. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. I'll never make the mistake of trusting someone so blindly again. That kind of naivety, it's a luxury I can't afford anymore. It was December 31st, and Jack found himself getting dressed for yet another corporate New Year's Eve party. Jack worked in finance, a field not exactly known for thrilling office parties, but his wife, Natalie, worked at a marketing agency known for throwing legendary bashes. She'd insisted he accompany her this year, reassuring him that, "This one will be different, I promise." Her excitement was infectious, and Jack found himself putting on his best suit with a sense of anticipation. He couldn't remember the last time Natalie had been so thrilled about spending time together. Natalie had always been a vibrant presence in his life. With her quick wit and endless energy, she seemed to attract attention wherever they went. They'd been together for almost a decade, their relationship grounded in shared ambitions and mutual respect. Sure, like any couple, they'd faced ups and downs, but Jack trusted her completely. She was his world. That night, they arrived at the lavish hotel where the agency had rented a ballroom. Everything was set up with extravagance: ice sculptures, a DJ spinning tunes, and an open bar stocked with top-shelf liquor. Jack could already see several familiar faces from Natalie's office, people he'd met at prior events. But it was one new face that immediately caught his eye. A tall, sharply dressed man with a magnetic presence, surrounded by a small crowd. Natalie noticed his gaze. "Oh, that's Alex," she whispered, leaning close. "The agency's newest creative director. Just transferred here from New York. He's amazing, super talented, and honestly, a little intimidating." Jack chuckled. "I think you might be the only one intimidated by him." But the way she looked at Alex made something stir in Jack. It wasn't jealousy, at least he didn't think it was. Just curiosity about the man who seemed to captivate Natalie's attention with such ease. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew more festive. The countdown loomed closer, and Jack watched as Natalie moved around the room, chatting and laughing with her colleagues. At one point, she grabbed his hand, pulling him into the center of the dance floor. "Come on, Jack. Just this once. Let's dance." He obliged, wrapping his arms around her as they swayed to the music. But even in his arms, her gaze would drift toward Alex, who was across the room, engaged in some lively conversation. It was subtle, but Jack noticed. The party was in full swing, with laughter and chatter blending into the beat of the music. As the clock crept closer to midnight, Natalie excused herself to the restroom, leaving Jack at the bar. He watched her disappear into the crowd and then caught sight of Alex approaching him with a friendly, easygoing smile. "Hey, Jack, right?" Alex extended his hand. "Natalie's husband. She talks about you a lot." Jack shook his hand, feeling an odd mixture of pride and discomfort. "Yeah, that's me," he replied, trying to sound casual. "It's great to finally put a face to the name she keeps mentioning." They chatted for a while, mostly about work and a few shared interests. Alex was as charming as he looked, effortlessly keeping the conversation light and engaging. As they talked, Jack noticed the way people seemed drawn to Alex, like moths to a flame, and began to understand why he commanded so much respect at the agency. Finally, Natalie returned, looking a bit flushed and, to Jack's surprise, slightly breathless. She joined them at the bar, her eyes flickering between her husband and her charismatic colleague. After a few more minutes of small talk, Alex excused himself to mingle with others, and Natalie turned to Jack with an unreadable expression. "I'm going to go check on a few of my team members," she said, giving Jack's arm a soft squeeze. "I'll be back in a bit. Don't worry. I won't leave you alone for long." Jack nodded, watching her blend back into the crowd. He sipped his drink and tried to enjoy the party, but he couldn't shake a strange sense of detachment. Maybe it was just the surreal environment of the lavish event, or maybe it was the way Natalie kept drifting toward Alex's orbit, as though pulled by some invisible force. Minutes turned into nearly half an hour. Jack's curiosity got the better of him, so he slipped through the crowd, looking for her. After scanning the room, he noticed her near the terrace, deep in conversation with Alex. She seemed completely absorbed in whatever he was saying, her body angled toward him, laughter spilling from her lips as she placed a hand on his arm. The sight sent an uncomfortable twinge through Jack, but he shook it off. He approached them, putting on his best smile, and Natalie quickly noticed him. Her expression brightened, but there was a slight hesitation that Jack couldn't ignore. "There you are," she said, stepping toward him. "We were just talking about the project Alex is leading next month. It's going to be huge." "Sounds exciting," Jack replied, his voice steady, but his eyes lingered on Alex for a beat longer than necessary. "Oh, it's more than exciting," Alex chimed in, flashing his confident smile. "Actually, we're doing a team-building trip upstate next weekend. Should be a great chance to bond and blow off some steam after the holiday rush. That sounds nice, Jack said, trying to sound enthusiastic, though he felt oddly left out. Natalie's eyes flickered, and she bit her lip. You know, you could come with us. I mean, they always say, the more, the merrier, right? There was a strange tension in her voice, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as she was convincing him. But something in the way Alex's eyes glimmered told Jack there was more to this invitation than she was letting on. He forced a smile. We'll see, he said. The clock ticked down toward midnight, and the energy in the room surged. Jack couldn't shake the lingering unease as he watched Natalie move back into the crowd with Alex. It was subtle, but she seemed drawn to him in a way that left Jack on edge, a slight feeling he couldn't ignore no matter how hard he tried. Just as he was about to push aside his discomfort, Natalie reappeared by his side, wrapping her arms around him with a warm smile. Are you having fun? She asked, looking into his eyes with that familiar spark he'd fallen in love with so many years ago. Yeah, Jack replied, smiling as he pulled her closer. For a moment he felt like everything was okay. But then Alex appeared behind her, drink in hand, flashing a smile that was just a little too knowing. He raised his glass. Here's to New Year's, guys. Fresh starts and new opportunities. Jack clinked his glass with Alex's, forcing himself to smile as he swallowed a gulp of champagne. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8, and the crowd pulled in close, ready for the stroke of midnight. Natalie leaned in, brushing her lips against Jack's cheek. Happy New Year, babe, she whispered, her voice low and sweet. As the crowd erupted in cheers and the DJ pumped up the music, she kissed him quickly before pulling away. I'm going to grab my coat, she said, barely audible over the noise. It's getting a little stuffy in here. Jack nodded, thinking she'd be right back, but as he waited, 5 minutes passed. Then 10. He glanced around, his mind churning. Had she slipped outside for air? He felt an uneasy twinge and decided to go looking for her. As he moved through the dimly lit hallway outside the ballroom, he noticed an open door leading toward a staircase. Instinct guided him, and he followed the faint sound of voices down the stairs. He reached a hallway lined with a few unmarked rooms, likely private offices. His heart pounded as he heard faint laughter echoing from behind one of the closed doors. Jack edged closer, barely breathing as he pressed his ear against the door. There it was, Natalie's laughter, unmistakable, but tinged with something unfamiliar, almost flirtatious. And then another voice, Alex's. Jack's mind raced, every suspicion he'd felt that night colliding with this moment. It was like he was outside himself, paralyzed with disbelief. His gut urged him to throw open the door, confront them, demand answers, but he stopped himself, unwilling to let his worst fears be confirmed in such a brutal way. Just then, he heard the unmistakable sound of a soft, intimate whisper. His heart shattered as he backed away, the reality crashing over him. He took a deep breath, rage and betrayal swirling in him like a storm, and he walked back to the ballroom alone, the room now feeling strange and hollow. He would make them pay for this, both of them. Jack returned to the ballroom, his mind racing, replaying every look, every subtle touch, every stolen glance he'd seen between Natalie and Alex that night. As the revelry of New Year's Eve continued around him, he felt like an outsider looking in, detached and numb. He had a plan forming, something dark and deliberate, but he needed proof. If this was happening, he was going to make sure they didn't slip away unscathed. He pulled out his phone, texting Natalie casually. Where did you go? Getting worried over here. He watched the message go through and saw the indicator showing she'd read it, but there was no reply. His suspicions were all but confirmed. Still, he knew he had to bide his time, play his cards right. He went to the coat check, picking up her coat and pretending to laugh and joke with the other guests in case anyone was watching. All the while, he kept a close eye on the hallway leading to the stairwell, and finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw them emerge, Natalie and Alex, looking flushed, laughing softly. Natalie pulled her coat on, glancing around to see if anyone was watching, but she didn't notice Jack in the corner, observing her every move. When she finally spotted him, her face registered surprise for just a second before she covered it with a smile. She walked up to him as though nothing had happened, pressing a quick kiss to his cheek. "Ready to go?" she asked, her tone light and airy, almost too casual. "Of course," Jack replied, his own smile practiced and calm. He slipped his arm around her, feeling her lean into him, trying to act as though the evening had been nothing but innocent fun. As they left, Jack kept the conversation light, asking her about the party and their friends, even making her laugh once or twice. But inside, he was seething, every word feeling like a betrayal in itself. He let her talk and watched her closely, her nonchalance only adding fuel to the fire. That night, while she slept soundly beside him, he lay awake, replaying the evening in his mind, feeling the weight of her betrayal settling in. He had everything he needed to turn the tables on her, just one piece of evidence that would be undeniable. Over the next few days, Jack put his plan in motion. He knew Natalie's weaknesses, the secrets she kept about work projects, the over-the-line friendly messages she'd exchange with clients and colleagues. Her new infatuation with Alex had clearly blinded her to the risks, and Jack was more than willing to exploit that. He began by setting up a few cameras and audio recorders in their home office, places Natalie wouldn't think to check. Then he discreetly synced her phone to his laptop, enabling him to monitor her messages. Sure enough, the texts between her and Alex were more than enough to confirm his suspicions. They were flirty, suggestive, sometimes graphic, and damning. Each time a new message came through, Jack felt the sting of betrayal anew, but he kept his calm, knowing his patience would be rewarded. He saved the screenshots, carefully cataloging them into a file, documenting everything meticulously. He didn't just want a confrontation. He wanted a complete takedown. On the morning of January 15th, Jack set the final part of his plan into motion. He'd arranged a meeting at a cozy coffee shop with a couple of Natalie's closest friends, who happened to be mutual acquaintances of Alex as well. They were the kinds of friends who couldn't resist a juicy story, and Jack knew they'd make sure it spread like wildfire. Natalie arrived at the coffee shop later that afternoon, surprised to find her husband already there, waiting. He had his laptop open on the table, and as she approached, he motioned for her to sit. She glanced around, noticing her friends at nearby tables, giving Jack a questioning look. "Jack?" she asked, a hint of nerves in her voice. "What's going on?" "Oh, just a little coffee date with my wife," he replied smoothly, sliding the laptop toward her. "I thought we'd catch up, maybe discuss a few recent developments." Before she could respond, he tapped the trackpad, opening the file filled with screenshots of her texts with Alex. Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find something, anything to say. But Jack wasn't finished. "And it seems your friend Alex has been having a little more than a professional connection with you, hasn't he?" Jack's tone was calm, almost cold, as he spoke, his gaze never leaving hers. Natalie's face drained of color, but she tried to put on a brave face. "Jack, please, it's not what it looks like." "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "And here's the best part. I've already sent these to HR, along with a request for a full investigation. Considering Alex's reputation, I'm sure they'll be thrilled to handle this scandal. Let's see if his creative genius will save him now." Natalie's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears as she looked around, suddenly noticing her friends watching the entire scene unfold. Wordlessly, Jack stood up, leaving her to stammer and sob. his satisfaction tempered only by the ache of her betrayal. That evening, he changed the locks on their home and sent her a single final message. Consider yourself served. Jack had already contacted a divorce lawyer, prepared to take her for every penny she had. He'd given her one last chance that night at the party, and she had made her choice. And now, her life, her job, and everything she'd risked for that fleeting moment would come crashing down around her. As he shut the door on their life together, he felt a strange calm wash over him, a quiet, steady peace. The betrayal still hurt, but in the end, he knew he'd done what he had to do. This New Year's Eve would mark the start of a new life, and this time, he'd make sure he was never blindsided again.
I still remember the exact moment that sent my world spinning off its axis. It was a typical Wednesday night, and I'd just wrapped up a long day at work. I came home to my wife, Natalie, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, scrolling through her phone. She looked up with a smile when I walked in, her face soft under the living room lights, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. "Long day?" she asked, her voice warm, as if nothing in our lives was amiss. "Same as usual," I replied, bending down to kiss her. Her perfume, a faint vanilla scent I'd come to love, mixed with the aroma of her wine. Everything seemed so normal, so right. It was only when I went to shower that things started to feel off. When I came back, Natalie was still on her phone, engrossed in something that seemed to hold all of her attention. I was used to seeing her relax after work, but her thumb swiped up and down in quick, nervous motions, as if she were trying to absorb every word on her screen. I asked if everything was okay, and she barely looked up, giving me a distracted smile. I brushed it off as nothing, just part of her decompressing after her own long day. The real jolt didn't come until later that night. As I crawled into bed, her phone buzzed. She was still brushing her teeth, and I figured it was just a work notification, the usual stuff. But the screen lit up again, and this time I saw the name James flash on her screen. James. My pulse quickened. I hadn't heard that name come up in conversation, not once, and it certainly didn't belong to anyone in our circle. Just as I was about to turn away, the screen flashed again. "I can't wait to see you again, Friday, 8 p.m. I felt my stomach drop. The message haunted me through the rest of the night. I lay beside Natalie, listening to her soft breathing, a steady rhythm that used to lull me to sleep, but now felt like a slow countdown to something horrible. I couldn't shake the image of that message. "I can't wait to see you again." The words replayed in my mind, each time twisting deeper like a knife. Who was James? And what was happening Friday at 8? Over the next 2 days, I watched her more closely, noting the tiniest changes. I saw her checking her phone more than usual, her face lighting up with secret smiles I hadn't seen in a while. There was a spring in her step, and she hummed to herself around the house. For months now, Natalie and I had drifted into a routine that felt more like coexistence than a marriage. I'd written it off as a rough patch, both of us busy with work, but now, watching her light up like this, I realized how long it had been since she'd looked at me that way. The thought was infuriating. That single, innocent smile felt like evidence, like an admission. Yet I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not without something more concrete. My brain ran in circles, 1,000 questions, theories, and plans. Should I confront her and demand answers? Should I snoop through her phone to confirm what I dreaded? Or should I just wait until Friday and see what happened? I took Friday off from work, claiming I needed a mental health day. Natalie seemed oblivious to my anxiety, already deep in her own plans for the weekend. She told me she was meeting friends for dinner Friday night and that I shouldn't wait up since she'd be back late. I acted nonchalant, even smiled as she left the house, but the minute the door closed, a surge of rage flared up inside me. So that was her plan. A night out with friends, huh? At 7:30, I left the house and parked my car at the corner, out of sight from our house. Her favorite restaurant was about 15 minutes away, so I figured I had time. Sure enough, she left promptly at 7:45, dressed in an outfit I hadn't seen before, a sleek figure-hugging black dress. My heart clenched seeing her like that, looking stunning and effortlessly graceful. It was an outfit meant for someone else's eyes, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. Keeping my distance, I followed her car until she pulled into a small, upscale restaurant on the other side of town. I watched as she stepped out, glanced around like she was searching for someone, and then a man stepped out of a dark sedan nearby. James. Tall, charming looking, with a neatly pressed suit and an easy smile, he greeted her with a quick kiss on the cheek. The two of them walked into the restaurant together, his hand lightly on her back, guiding her in. I felt my world shatter right there in the car. The woman I'd loved, trusted, built a life with, was on a date with another man. And for the first time in my life, I had no idea what to do next. I sat there in my car, frozen, watching them disappear into the restaurant. The shock was like ice water pouring over me, numbing my hands and mind as I tried to process what I'd just seen. Natalie, the woman who'd promised to love me through everything, was with someone else. It felt surreal, like I was watching a movie that couldn't possibly be my life. But it was. For half an hour I sat there, fists clenched on the steering wheel, my pulse thundering in my ears. Every fiber of my being wanted to storm into that restaurant, flip their table, and demand an explanation right then and there, but part of me held back. I needed to know more. I needed to understand how far this had gone, what kind of lie I was living. Unable to sit still any longer, I left my car and walked up to the restaurant's front windows. Inside, I saw Natalie and James in a cozy corner booth, laughing and leaning in close, completely lost in each other. My heart pounded, rage simmering as I saw them smiling, talking intimately as if they were in their own world. I wondered how many other nights had been like this. How long had she been sneaking around, lying to my face? Finally, when I could take it no longer, I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures of them together, thinking maybe I'd need proof if I wanted answers later. Then I turned and walked back to my car, fighting the urge to go back in and break the illusion of their perfect little date. As I waited in the car, an idea started to take shape, one that felt cold and calculated. If she could lie so effortlessly, then maybe I could too. I opened a new message to Natalie, quickly typing, "Hey babe, just finished up at work and thinking about you. Hope you're having fun with the girls. Let me know when you're headed home." The message went through and I watched from my car as she glanced down at her phone, a flicker of guilt briefly crossing her face. She typed back after a few seconds. "Thanks, love. It's been a blast. See you later." There it was, plain as day. A lie, straight to my face. Something inside me cracked, replaced by a strange sense of calm that only comes when you have nothing left to lose. After an agonizing 2 hours, I watched her and James walk out of the restaurant, her hand lightly grazing his arm as they laughed about something. They exchanged a lingering hug before parting ways, and she made her way back to her car, a secret smile still on her face. And I knew without a doubt that I'd be confronting her that night. I made it back home before her, sitting in the living room in darkness. My mind raced, torn between confronting her directly and wanting to see her squirm under subtle questions. I imagined what she might say, the excuses she'd make. Every scenario filled me with a mix of rage, betrayal, and a desperate ache I hadn't expected. I poured myself a drink, needing something to dull the sting before she walked in. A little after midnight, the front door clicked open. Natalie stepped inside, quietly closing it behind her. She didn't see me right away, and I watched as she took off her heels, exhaling like someone who'd had the perfect night. She looked up, startled, when she finally noticed me sitting there. "Oh," she said, holding her chest in mock surprise. "You scared me." I just stared at her, taking in every detail. Her carefully done makeup, her hair still perfectly styled, the slight flush in her cheeks. She looked radiant, but it wasn't for me. "Did you have a good time?" I asked, my voice cold but calm. Natalie blinked, obviously caught off guard. Yeah, it was just a few of the girls from work. Nothing special." She fumbled with her coat, avoiding my gaze, but I didn't let up. "That's nice. Who all was there?" Her eyes flicked to mine for just a second too long before she quickly responded. Oh, just the usual crowd. Rachel, Kim. She trailed off, probably realizing I'd never heard of these people before. A few others. A chill settled over me as I sipped my drink, each lie she told stoking the fire inside me. Rachel and Kim, huh? Interesting, because I thought you were having dinner with James. Her face froze and the color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth opened, closed, and then opened again as she tried to find the right words. What? What are you talking about? She stammered, her voice shaking just slightly. James, I repeated slowly. Tall guy, dark hair, charming smile. The one you were with tonight at that little restaurant across town. Natalie's eyes widened in panic, and her face crumpled with a mix of fear and guilt. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. I can explain, she whispered. Go on then, I said, keeping my tone icy. Explain to me what exactly you were doing with him tonight while I sat here believing you were with your friends. She looked up, her eyes filled with tears, but somehow I felt nothing. I'm sorry, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't mean for you to find out this way. I clenched my fists, taking a deep breath to hold back the flood of anger. So you did mean for me to find out some other way? When, Natalie? When you decided it was convenient? Or were you hoping I'd just keep playing the fool? She shook her head, looking down in shame. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said almost to herself. It just happened. We worked together and it started with harmless conversations and then... She trailed off, as if even she couldn't justify it. So it's been going on for a while then, I pressed, needing her to say it out loud, to admit the truth. How long? Her silence answered the question, and the air between us grew thick with the weight of her betrayal. She opened her mouth, but instead of a real answer, all she managed to say was, I didn't want to hurt you. I laughed bitterly. Well, congratulations. You succeeded spectacularly. I stood up, every muscle in my body taut. I thought we were in this together, that no matter what happened, we'd work through it. But you decided to work through it with someone else. Tears streamed down her face and she reached out a hand, pleading, Please, can we talk about this? I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I don't want to lose you. I still love you. I stared at her hand, feeling an overwhelming urge to pull her close and push her away at the same time. I don't even know who you are right now, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. I need time, Natalie. A lot of time. And space. Without waiting for her response, I walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, looking as shattered as I felt inside. That night, I slept in the guest room, though sleep barely came. My mind was a relentless storm, replaying the evening's confrontation, her excuses, the way she looked when she tried to reach out to me with tears streaming down her face. Part of me wanted to turn back, to talk, to try to understand. But a much louder part knew that no explanation could undo the damage her betrayal had caused. The next morning, I woke early and left before she could find me. I took a long drive, trying to make sense of what had happened. After hours on the road, watching miles pass by in a blur, I finally stopped at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, feeling worn down, defeated. I ordered a coffee, staring out the window at nothing in particular, wondering what came next. My phone buzzed with messages from Natalie. Long, emotional ones apologizing, begging for a second chance, explaining that it had only been a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. She said she regretted everything, that she'd end things with James immediately if I would just come home so we could talk, that she'd do anything to make it right. I left her messages unread. As days passed, I kept my distance. Natalie stayed in the house, trying to give me space, trying to reach out with quiet gestures. A cup of coffee waiting for me in the morning, a note on the kitchen counter saying she missed me, little texts throughout the day checking in. But I couldn't bring myself to engage with her, not yet. I felt like a stranger in my own home, haunted by the memories of our life together that now seemed tainted. Eventually, we did talk. I sat across from her, looking at the woman I once thought I knew better than anyone. She opened up about things I hadn't expected: the loneliness, the way she felt we had drifted apart over the years, how she found herself lost in a life she didn't recognize. She admitted she was wrong, that she'd let her own insecurities and doubts cloud her judgment. She apologized over and over, saying she didn't expect forgiveness, but wanted to try to rebuild the trust she'd broken. I listened, but the betrayal lingered, a chasm between us that I didn't know how to bridge. I told her I didn't know if I could ever trust her again, that even if we tried, things would never go back to how they were. She nodded, her face somber, as if she understood. She agreed to give me space, even suggesting a temporary separation so we could both gain perspective. Surprisingly, I agreed. Over the next month, Natalie moved in with her sister. During that time, I wrestled with my own emotions, feeling waves of anger, betrayal, and sorrow, each one rolling over me, unpredictable and raw. I leaned on friends and family, finding strength in the people who reminded me that I could and would find a way forward. Slowly, I started rediscovering parts of myself that I'd buried over the years, parts I'd forgotten in the rhythms of daily life. The separation offered clarity. Natalie sent a few letters, heartfelt ones, detailing the things she was working on, in herself, for herself. She told me she'd left her job to fully cut ties with James, that she was committed to therapy, to becoming someone she could respect again, someone she hoped I might eventually forgive. And as much as I wanted to hold on to my resentment, a small part of me couldn't deny the sincerity in her words. A few months later, we met for coffee. She looked different, calmer, more grounded, less like the stranger I'd confronted that night and more like the woman I'd fallen in love with. We talked, really talked, for the first time in a long time. I admitted my own failures in the relationship, how I'd let things drift, how I'd become too comfortable assuming we'd always be fine without putting in the work. She admitted her mistakes too, fully, without excuses. In the end, we decided to try counseling, not necessarily to save our marriage, but to find closure, to rebuild a foundation of honesty, wherever that might lead us. Over time, we worked through the hurt and the broken trust, letting our scars shape a new understanding of each other. Years later, looking back, I can't say that the pain disappeared completely. I'm not sure betrayal like that ever fades entirely. But Natalie and I found a way forward, one step at a time. It wasn't a perfect path, but it was real, and in the end, it brought us to a place of honesty, strength, and maybe, just maybe, a different kind of love.